Hey everyone, what's going on? Jeff here from Films at Home, and today I've got a 4K review to do for you. We're going to be taking a look at a new release from Kino Lorber. They have been doing a couple of 4K releases recently, starting with Spaceballs on 4K, and now we're taking a look at the classic movie, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly on 4K Ultra HD. So there's a lot of interesting things that are going on with this release. There have been a lot of interesting releases and different versions of this movie in the past, so I'll try to cover all of that, give you a full 4K review on the audio, the visuals, and packaging and special features, and ultimately let you all know whether or not this is worth an upgrade. So to start on this, there's a little bit of history about this movie on home media and home video. So the first real Blu-ray release of this came out, or I shouldn't say it's not the first Blu-ray release, but there was a newly mastered Blu-ray release of this back in 2014. So towards the end of Blu-ray, as we started moving into 4K, and it had a really awful yellow-orange tint all over it. So the mastering process there, the color balance, the color timing, everything was really off. Something was off with that release. Now in 2017, Kino Lorber, who's producing this 4K release, did their own 4K master and kind of tried to rebalance the color timing. What they did was they removed a lot of the yellowish orange color, but what it resulted in, because they were balancing and playing with, saturation and contrast, was a kind of bluish green picture. So it kind of went from one extreme to the other, unfortunately, because they were trying to compensate for how yellow orange the previous scan was. So it's been kind of a controversial movie. It's had a lot of subpar Blu-ray releases, in my opinion. And so on this 4K release, again, they have redone some of the color timing here for the 4K and redone the Blu-ray that's included in with this package. So the whole thing is redone, remastered, at least from a color standpoint. Now, being shot on film and obviously being a very epic, high production movie, the 4K detail and resolution looks great. Now, the previous 4K transfer on a Blu-ray disc looked pretty good as well, but you can definitely see that there's a better grain structure here. Details more refined. It is a nice step up in the right direction for the 4K resolution, and by far it's the best it's ever looked just in terms of detail, quality, film grain, structure on any format. This is as good as this movie's ever looked. But the real question I had with this one was, what's the color gonna look like? How did they redo it? And I'm happy to say that, again, this is the best it's ever looked from a color balance, color timing standpoint. It's not perfect. They didn't completely fix all of the issues, but they found some happy medium between the terrible yellow, orange, completely out of spec 2014 release and the corrected version in 2017. They found somewhere in the middle that meets and meshes well. You're gonna see some scenes here and there that might be a little too yellow-orange, a little too bluish-green, but for the most part, this is a much more balanced color. So I would say this is corrected, but it still has moments and it's not perfect. But that 4K detail really helps. Now, one interesting thing that you need to note with this release is that it's a standard dynamic range. So you're not getting high dynamic range. You're just getting SDR. There's no HDR, which I think is kind of curious. I don't really know why Kino didn't do this. They did it on Spaceballs, and I thought it would be, a big help, especially because of the color issues that this movie had to have a little bit of that extra data, a little bit more color space to work with. But they opted against it. They just went with the SDR. It may have to do with all the corrections that they had to do. It may have to do with cost. As I talked about in some remastering videos, an HDR conversion can cost upwards of $100,000. That's a huge investment for a smaller independent distributor like Kino, so I can't always blame them. But the lack of HDR does make this just a real minor step in the right direction over that Blu-ray. Your biggest difference here is going to be a better grain structure, better film quality, better detail, and then that improved color. So while it doesn't have HDR, it's a minor step in the right direction, and it's, I would call, a corrected version of this movie that's as good as it's ever looked. Now, that being said, if you had bought the 4K mastered Blu-ray, it could be a hard sell for you, but If you want the corrected version and that Blu-ray and the previous Blu-ray release were bothering you, this is the best version that you can get, even without HDR. It would be worth an upgrade, but I would say this is probably catering to more of a niche collector 4K enthusiast market, and this may not be a 4K movie that appeals to everybody because it's just not going to be as big a leap as maybe some of the other movies you've seen out there. Now in the audio, we're getting the same audio tracks that were available on the previous Blu-ray. There's a stereo, there's a 2.0, and there's a DTS HD Master Audio 5.1. Both very good, but both were already available. They sound exactly the same. If they're different, I could not tell. I didn't hear anything different about them. And I should say I do have the 2017 Blu-ray in my collection, so I have some good comparison points to make during this review. But yeah, I just didn't hear or really notice anything different. Sounds like it's the exact same track, which would make sense, but you know, with the score of this movie being so iconic, could an Atmos track have added a little something extra? Maybe, but again, you're talking about a six-figure investment for a small studio like Kino. Probably doesn't make sense given their sales. If they make six figures in sales off of this release, it's probably successful. So to invest $200,000-$300,000 in HDR and Atmos, that's a tough sell for a smaller independent label. Now the packaging is a bit different than the previous Blu-ray. It does come with this slipcover, which is a little different. Same artwork on the inside, and then opening this up, you've got the two discs, 4K and Blu-ray with the typical Kino branding. No disc art, just the Kino Lorber disc art on that. And as I mentioned, the Blu-ray disc that's included with this is also a corrected version over the previous one. So they redid both discs. They're not just packaging the Blu-ray disc that came in 2017 into this. So even if you don't have 4K yet, but you're thinking about upgrading, especially if you've never bought this movie before on Blu-ray, this is the best Blu-ray disc as well as the best 4K disc that's out there. So it could be a good purchase even for those of you who haven't fully upgraded to 4K, but maybe someday plan to. Special features also all port over from the previous Blu-ray, but just to cover some of them, there's an audio commentary by film historian Tim Lucas. There's a making of documentary. There's a few behind the scenes on the music and the score, on Sergio Leone's style, a featurette on that, a Civil War documentary in here, and then sort of a behind the scenes on the reconstruction, deleted scenes. There's all kinds of extras. Kino tends to do a pretty good job with that, and they did a great job on the previous Blu-ray and did manage to, you know, port that over here, so that's a good thing. You're not losing anything by upgrading, and you're not missing out by going to the 4K versus the Blu-ray. So overall, like, this was a pretty interesting review because I don't review too many 4K movies that don't have HDR. So usually that's, you know, the one thing you're looking for. Obviously there's always going to be an upgrade in detail and quality and grain structure with movies shot on film, but as you're looking, you know, at HDR coloring, that's where you can usually start to see the biggest upgrade on 4K movies is the color, not so much the detail in many cases. So without that here, what I really wanted to focus on was the color correction and how they handled that. And I would say I'd give it a solid 4 out of 5. There's still work that could be done with this movie. It's not a perfect restoration yet, but it's really close. And if I rated the previous Blu-ray a 3 out of 5, you know, this 4K would be a 4 out of 5. Maybe someday we can get there, 5 out of 5, get this perfect restoration. But it must be a difficult print. There must be difficult things going on here with the movie and the elements that are available. But this is the best it's ever looked. Color wise, detail wise, the 4K disc is great. It obviously has that great soundtrack ported over from the Blu-ray and all the special features. So it is, if you're a fan of this movie or you've just never purchased it before on any format but you want to own it, I think this is a good purchase. And I think for the right person, the niche, you know, sort of 4K visual AV enthusiast, this should be worth an upgrade. I will say I'd love to see the big studios work together on a full restoration of this, maybe with a distributor like Kino that has some more resources. It's funny that, you know, it's an MGM movie. It's funny that nobody wanted to put this out from the major labels because it is such a huge title. I would put it up there in terms of just quality of the movie itself, right up there with stuff like The Shining in 2001 and Bridge on the River Kwai and all these other classics that have gotten, you know, studio 4K releases. So it's interesting, maybe Kino still has the rights, but for an independent smaller studio, I give them a lot of props for this release. It was certainly a difficult release to put out, considering what happened in 2017, and they didn't just stick with that. They corrected it. They corrected both discs, and they did a nice job. So props to them on this release. I would love to see some HDR and some Atmos, but again, the cost probably prohibitive without having the big studios, the Paramounts, Warner, Disney, Fox behind you. It's probably really hard to do that, so I can't entirely blame them from a business standpoint. So if you're interested and want to pick this up, I will leave a link down in the description. If you purchase through that link, that helps support my channel, but also helps support Kino. You can also find this at your local stores like Bull Moose, or some of your local video stores will probably have this release as well. You can also buy it directly from Kino. That's always an option, and obviously then the proceeds go right to them. But if you use my Amazon link, that's a great way to passively support me and my channel and my content and reviews, so I appreciate that. Other than that, check out all the other links down in the description for ways that you can help support the channel and follow along this collection journey and follow with my channel. TikTok, Instagram, and of course subscribing and having your notifications on is a great way to stay up to date on everything. So appreciate you all watching. It's been a minute since I did a 4K review, so I'm happy to be back on the wagon here and doing some more 4K reviews. I've got some more great stuff to do for you. Movie room tours, collection updates. I've transformed this whole room with, if you haven't seen my latest video, life update, channel update, lots of stuff going on. So I was happy to share all that, and I'll be filming it soon. So make sure you're tuning in for all that. And I really appreciate y'all watching and sticking with me through this little break I took. But appreciate everybody watching. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you guys soon.